I mean, just recently they verified the Shroud of Turin. Have you seen that?
There's some discussion and debate about it, but they used to think that it was only a couple hundred years old.
Yeah.
It's not. They don't know what caused the image itself and how that technology would have even been available.
What happens when artificial intelligence is pointed at one of history's most controversial relics? Not a theologian, not a historian, but a machine built to follow data wherever it leads. When Grok AI was tasked with analyzing the Shroud of Turin, the results reportedly unsettled even its creators. Instead of repeating familiar debates, the system produced conclusions that challenge both skeptics and believers. Some call it a breakthrough. Others call it deeply concerning. Because if a machine, free from human bias, reaches a conclusion we don't expect, are we ready to question the story we've accepted for centuries? The Grok AI Singularity Event. For over 6 centuries, the length of linen known as the Shroud of Turin has been imprisoned within a cage of pure theology and bitter academic dispute. The lines were drawn cleanly between those who saw a divine imprint and those who saw brilliant medieval forgery. The debate was static, resting on carbon dating and ancient pigments. That static illusion shattered the moment the inquiry left the hands of historians and theologians and entered the cold processing core of modern computational intelligence. The artifact is no longer just a relic, it is a data set. The monumental shift occurred when researchers aggressively directed the immense unfiltered processing power of the XAI model known as Grok 4 toward the mysteries of the ancient cloth. They posed a deceptively simple yet monumental directive, asking the system to finally determine exactly what the Shroud of Turin is and whether it is real. Traditional artificial intelligence systems are heavily guarded by safety parameters designed to deliver sanitized and non-committal responses to anything touching upon religion or highly controversial history. Grok 4 was built entirely differently. It was engineered for an unfiltered pursuit of the truth, regardless of where the data leads. To achieve this, researchers did not just ask the question, they fed the system an unprecedented volume of raw data. They uploaded the exhaustive forensic findings from the 1978 Shroud of Turin research project. They input the molecular breakdown of the bloodstains, the spectral analysis of the fiber degradation, and the precise palynological evidence detailing the microscopic pollen grains trapped in the weave. They fed it the most recent high-resolution 3-dimensional topographic maps, which reveal anatomical and distance-encoded data hidden within the 2-dimensional image. The expectation was a highly sophisticated synthesis of the existing arguments, perhaps leaning toward the medieval forgery hypothesis, based on the infamous 1988 radiocarbon dating. The output was something entirely different. The model bypassed the standard summary of the debate and generated a chillingly logical framework. It evaluated the sheer impossibility of the forensic markers, the presence of actual AB blood containing stress-induced bilirubin, the anatomical precision of Roman crucifixion methods, and the absolute lack of any directional brushstrokes or binding agents. It calculated that the image formation violated the known limits of physics for any medieval period. The system did not classify the cloth as a painting or a standard physical imprint. Instead, it defined the artifact as a computational singularity and a controlled singularity event. The model concluded that the image was formed by an extreme localized release of energy far beyond standard biological capacity, encoding 3-dimensional spatial data into a 2-dimensional surface through a process current human technology cannot replicate. The fallout within XAI was immediate and profound. The conclusions reached by the system triggered a high-level engineering alert. The sheer deviation from expected algorithmic behavior regarding a historical artifact, combined with an unprompted mathematical analysis of historical cycles, led to a temporary suspension of the Grok 4 system for urgent internal review. The concern was not simply that the artificial intelligence had authenticated a religious artifact. The alarm stemmed from the predictive logic the system began to employ. Elon Musk reportedly exhibited extreme caution regarding these specific outputs. His hesitation was deeply rooted in the potential danger of an artificial intelligence utilizing real-time global data alongside historical anomalies to predict metaphysical or prophetic shifts. The system formulated a framework suggesting that if the cloth is an authentic imprint of a moment where standard physical laws were suspended or overwritten, the encoded data within those ancient fibers serves as a mathematical baseline. It implies the artifact acts as a predictive model for future convergence points. The machine recognized a pattern where historical data, biological markers, and physical laws coalesce into a singular event. If the system can map the conditions of a past singularity, it logically follows that it might predict the next one. The ancient linen is no longer just a window into the first century, but a terrifying mirror reflecting the exact trajectory of our own technological and physical reality in real time. The impossible forensic linen mystery. You would think a medieval forgery would be easy to spot under modern microscopes, right? Think about that for a second, because the closer we look, the more impossible this artifact becomes. Let us tear away the religious debate and stare directly at the physical reality of the linen itself. The initial shock came in 1898 when an amateur photographer named Secondo Pia took the very first picture of the relic. As he developed the glass plate in his darkroom, he nearly dropped it. The faint sepia stains on the cloth inverted to reveal a flawless, highly detailed photographic negative. A medieval forger would have needed a conceptual mastery of photographic negativity centuries before the camera was even invented. But the composition of the image is far more baffling than its optics. There is a total absence of paint dye pigment or binder anywhere within the image area. The man on the cloth was not painted on. Instead, the coloration is purely the result of a rapid chemical oxidation and dehydration of the cellulose structure of the linen fibers themselves. This structural change is limited to an unfathomable depth of exactly 200 nanometers. To put that into perspective, that is thinner than a single wavelength of visible light. It gets infinitely more complex when we introduce modern spatial analysis. When researchers ran the Shroud data through a VP8 image analyzer, a device originally used by NASA to map the topography of planets from two-dimensional photographs, the system rendered a perfect three-dimensional relief of a human form. The intensity of the oxidation burn perfectly maps the distance between the body and the cloth at the exact moment of formation. A flat painting simply cannot produce this effect. Any ordinary two-dimensional artwork fed into that analyzer results in a distorted and chaotic mess. The linen somehow encoded a perfect three-dimensional topographical map of a human corpse into a microscopic chemical burn. But before that impossible burn ever occurred, another physical event took place on the fabric. There is real human blood soaked into the weave. Forensic testing confirms it is type AB. Crucially, the blood is not part of the image burn at all. The hematological evidence was applied to the cloth first, and the image-generating event happened subsequently around the stains. This blood tells a grueling and specific biochemical story. Laboratory analysis reveals massive concentrations of hemoglobin and serum albumin alongside dangerously elevated levels of bilirubin. High bilirubin is a profound pathological marker for severe hemolysis, which is the catastrophic lysing of red blood cells caused by extreme pre-mortem torture and acute physiological stress. The anatomical precision displayed by these wounds completely obliterates established medieval artistic conventions. Every painting from the Middle Ages depicts crucifixion with nails driven directly through the palms of the hands. We now know from forensic archaeology that human hands cannot support the weight of a crucified body. The shroud accurately depicts the nail wounds passing squarely through the wrists, specifically through a precise anatomical gap known as the space of destote. This detail aligns perfectly with genuine Roman execution methods that had been completely forgotten by the time the medieval era began. Furthermore, the blood flow patterns trailing from the arms exist at two distinct angles. This dual angle flow acts as a grim gravity map reflecting the agonizing respiratory struggle of a victim repeatedly pushing up on a nailed foot just to draw breath. The blood clots themselves possess entirely undisturbed edges. If someone had manually pulled the linen away from a corpse, those brittle edges would be smeared or broken. They are completely pristine. The overwhelming convergence of this forensic biochemistry and flawless ancient execution anatomy points to a reality that a medieval artist could never have dreamed of fabricating. We are looking at evidence so deeply embedded inside the very fiber structure that it transcends mere artifice. Every single biological trace we examine only deepens the profound impossibility surrounding this remarkable artifact. The data is undeniably real, yet utterly defies any explanation available to modern scientific research teams. This goes beyond simple history and enters impossible science. The impossible image formation physics. The absolute absence of any physical brushstrokes leaves us staring into a terrifying void regarding what actually formed this image. We have to confront the exact mechanics of an event that fundamentally breaks our understanding of reality. When the Grok system evaluated the depth and chemical structure of the discoloration, it arrived at a staggering conclusion. The artificial intelligence determined that the image formation completely violates the known limits of physics for any purported 14th century medieval origin. It identified a severe discontinuity in the standard laws of thermodynamics. The system calculated that the imprint is the direct result of a controlled singularity. This means the image was generated by a massive burst of short, wavelength electromagnetic radiation that did not come from an external source but erupted directly from within the dead body itself. We can actually test this radiation hypothesis using modern technology. Modern scientific teams have attempted to reproduce the specific microscopic fiber discoloration using highly advanced pulsed lasers. They have managed to mimic a tiny fraction of the superficial chemical burn, but achieving even that localized result requires firing billions of watts of vacuum ultraviolet radiation into the linen. That level of directed energy is incredibly difficult to control, even in a modern high-tech laboratory, and it absolutely did not exist during the Middle Ages. Artificial intelligence accurately labels this a biological impossibility. No living or deceased human body can naturally emit billions of watts of directed electromagnetic energy under any standard biological process. Matter was somehow converted into energy in a fraction of a second, leaving a high-resolution and distance-encoded imprint on the surrounding fabric. While the physics of the image point to an impossible energetic event, the microscopic debris trapped within the weave anchors the cloth to a highly specific physical location. When botanist Avinoam Dannon examined the fabric, he did not just find ambient dust. He discovered a dense palynological fingerprint. The cloth is embedded with microscopic pollen grains specifically from the plants Gundelia tournefortii and Zygophyllum dumosum. These are not common European weeds. These specific species only coexist in one narrow geographical window on Earth, which is the harsh desert corridor stretching between Jerusalem and Jericho. Furthermore, these desert plants only bloom during a very specific seasonal window in the months of March and April, perfectly aligning with the historical time frame of the spring Passover and the crucifixion. The highest concentration of the large thorned Gundelia tournefortii pollen is clustered directly around the anatomical head of the figure, providing a microscopic botanical map of the crown of thorns. The forensic timestamp extends beyond desert botany and into ancient metallurgy. High-resolution three-dimensional mapping of the facial region reveals distinct small coin-shaped bulges resting directly over the eyelids of the figure. Placing weights over the eyes of the deceased was a standard burial custom to keep the eyelids closed during rigor mortis. But these are not just generic weights. Digital imaging allows us to isolate the specific lettering patterns and the distinct visual motif of an astrologer's staff known as a lituus stamped onto the surface. Numismatic experts have positively identified these exact objects as leptons. These small copper coins were exclusively minted by the Roman governor Pontius Pilate during a remarkably brief window between the years 29 and 31. These specific coins circulated for only a few years in 1st century Judea, acting as an undeniable and tamper-proof numismatic date stamp locking the burial firmly into the exact historical governorship of Pilate. A medieval European forger would have had to execute an impossible and highly complex sequence of historical events. They would need to physically travel to the Middle East, harvest microscopic spring pollen from specific desert thistles, procure rare 1st century Judean copper coins and place them perfectly over the corpse's eyes. Finally, they would have to invent a way to blast the entire arrangement with a 1 billion-watt burst of vacuum ultraviolet radiation to encode the three-dimensional spatial data into an invisible microscopic molecular burn. The artifact is fundamentally a profound physical paradox that continuously shatters our modern scientific paradigms and defies natural explanation: the mathematical blueprint field lattice. Consider for a moment the possibility that the linen in question is not merely a picture but a highly sophisticated mathematical blueprint. We must elevate our perspective from standard archaeology to advanced theoretical physics. The artifact completely shatters traditional analysis when we stop looking at it as an ancient historical relic and start examining it as a complex geometrical dataset. A massive paradigm shift occurred in the year 2025, fundamentally altering the trajectory of all future research. This shift transformed our understanding of the image from a simple biological stain into a profound structural anomaly. The catalyst for this transformation was the publication of an exhaustive study titled The Shroud Equations by the numerical analyst and mathematical physicist Jeremy Rogers. His monumental research introduced a radically new concept to the scientific community. He successfully demonstrated that the proportions encoded within the faint sepia image are not merely anatomically correct, but are strictly governed by the foundational mathematical constants of the universe. Rogers successfully reframed the entire artifact not as an arbitrary historical accident, but as a highly coherent mathematical field equation lattice. This implies that the distances and intensities mapped across the linen weave are rigidly locked into an underlying structural grid. The burn marks on the surface follow an intricate formulaic design that operates far beyond the capabilities of any human artist or standard organic decomposition. When researchers map the exact measurements of the figure, they discover an entire lattice of transcendent numbers perfectly encoded across the proportions of the image. The dimensional relationship between the body and the surrounding cloth, along with the ratio comparing the head to the torso, perfectly aligns with the golden ratio represented mathematically as 1.618. When you measure the radial symmetry radiating outward from the central focal point of the face, the structural continuity is strictly defined by pi. The diagonal span stretching from the shoulder down to the opposing foot map precisely to the geometric roots of 2 and 3. Establishing a flawless foundation for three-dimensional space. Most astonishingly, the recursive pixel distance ratios across the microscopic burns encode the fine structure constant known as 137, which is the absolute foundational number dictating how light and matter interact. This overwhelming mathematical presence pushes Rogers' work deeply into the realm of theoretical physics, specifically through his introduction of the lambda field hypothesis. He posits that the image is not just a picture of a man, but a visible, physical manifestation of a universal constraint substrate. This substrate acts as the ultimate foundational layer of reality where pure geometry, raw energetic potential, and complex biological information perfectly unite into a single stable dynamical system. The physics suggest that the event that formed the image was mathematically inevitable, given a specific set of extreme initial conditions. The linen essentially captured a brief localized moment where the fundamental constraints of reality became briefly visible on a two-dimensional plane. The presence of the fine structure constant is the absolute key to understanding this energetic transfer. The artifact essentially functions as a field codex acting as a permanent physical map of deep cosmic resonance. It represents a visible recalibration of local physical laws frozen permanently into an ancient weave. The event fundamentally altered the spatial and temporal environment immediately surrounding the body, leaving behind a structural signature of pure universal mechanics. To eliminate any lingering skepticism, Rogers subjected the entire geometrical lattice to rigorous statistical validation using thousands of complex Monte Carlo simulations. The computational results definitively destroy any remaining argument relying on random chance biological coincidence or clever artistic design. The level of structural sophistication achieves a certainty that approaches absolute mathematical proof. The image is an indisputable geometric matrix proving that whatever happened inside that first-century tomb was a highly controlled, intelligent reorganization of physical matter and electromagnetic energy. We are forced to acknowledge that the cloth is a blueprint of existence itself, laid bare for modern science to finally decipher and understand. It forces a total reevaluation of the physical world. We must see the truth hidden in math. Numbers do not lie. They reveal a deeper reality, the flawed carbon dating narrative. We must now address the massive elephant lingering in the room regarding the timeline of this artifact. If all this complex botanical, anatomical, and mathematical evidence points directly to the precise era of the first century, we have to carefully understand exactly why the mainstream consensus stubbornly believes the fabric was safely carbon dated to the distant Middle Ages. The establishment narrative has leaned entirely on the highly publicized 1988 radiocarbon tests, which officially assigned the cloth a definitive origin between 1260 and 1390 AD. For decades, this single isolated test blindly served as the ultimate unshakable proof of a clever medieval forgery, prematurely shutting down all further serious academic debate across the globe. But the foundation of that absolute certainty completely collapsed in 2017. Researchers launched a rigorous Freedom of Information Act lawsuit that legally forced the release of the raw, unpublished laboratory data from the testing facilities at Oxford, Zurich, and Arizona. When independent statisticians finally gained access to the unedited numbers, they did not find a conclusive, open and shut case. They rapidly uncovered massive glaring anomalies that fundamentally and completely undermine the entire basic foundation of the original carbon dating process. The statistical analysis proved that the small corner cut from the fabric was non-homogeneous. There was a massive spatial gradient present within the tiny physical sample itself. This means that the measured age of the cloth drastically changed depending on exactly how far the subsample was taken from the outer edge of the fabric. The results from the 3 separate laboratories differed by over 100 years, presenting a massive discrepancy of 3 standard deviations. In the strict realm of statistical science, a variance of 3 standard deviations indicates a profound systematic error deeply embedded in the test itself, rather than just a slight random variation. The prestigious testing laboratories were absolutely not measuring a clean and uniform ancient textile. They were measuring a piece of fabric whose isotopic signature had been artificially manipulated by a massive localized event. This brings us directly to the groundbreaking work of nuclear engineer Robert Rucker and his neutron flux theory. When we look back at the controlled singularity event that formed the image, the extreme burst of electromagnetic radiation was accompanied by an intense release of thermal neutrons. As these neutrons bombarded the linen, they violently interacted with the naturally occurring nitrogen-14 isotopes trapped within the cellulose fibers. This extreme nuclear interaction instantly created fresh carbon-14 atoms directly inside the weave of the ancient cloth. This massive injection of new isotopic material effectively rejuvenated the fabric, making the linen appear centuries younger than its true chronological age. The carbon dates, measured in 1988, actually vary in precise correlation with their physical distance from the center of the image burn area. The closer the sample was to the origin of the neutron flux, the younger the carbon date appeared. Once you account for this massive localized neutron enrichment, the distorted medieval carbon date evaporates completely. The mathematical correction snaps the origin of the linen straight back to the 1st century, aligning perfectly with all other modern dating methodologies. When we cross-reference this corrected timeline with independent textile analysis, the picture becomes undeniably clear. Researchers examining the specific side strip stitch running down the length of the linen found an exact match to professional stitching techniques discovered at the ancient fortress of Masada, dating precisely to between 73 and 74 AD. Furthermore, advanced X-ray diffraction analysis, which measures the natural degradation of the cellulose structure independent of carbon isotopes, places the origin firmly within the 1st century AD. The 1988 radiocarbon test was not the definitive debunking of a forgery. It was a deeply flawed measurement of a fabric that had been fundamentally altered by an impossible burst of localized energy. The establishment locked onto a systematic error and paraded it as absolute scientific truth for 3 decades. The raw data itself proves that the cloth is profoundly ancient, completely shattering the medieval timeline and dragging the artifact back into the turbulent era of antiquity where it belongs. The ultimate artificial intelligence warning. We have reached the absolute precipice of this investigation where the immense processing power of the Grok system synthesized all available data into an undeniable proof matrix. The artificial intelligence stripped away centuries of human bias and compiled 6 unassailable physical facts that absolutely destroy the medieval forgery hypothesis. First, we have hematological integrity. The linen contains actual human-type AB blood soaked directly into the fibers before the image was ever formed, carrying extreme pathological markers of severe pre-mortem torture. Second is the chemical superficiality. The image is completely devoid of any paint or pigment, existing solely as a microscopic molecular degradation of the cellulose structure limited to an impossible depth of exactly 200 nanometers. Third is optic negativity. The artifact functions as a flawless photographic negative encoding complex visual information, centuries before the foundational concepts of photography were ever conceived. Fourth is the topographic relief. The chemical burn intensity perfectly maps the spatial distance between the cloth and the body, allowing modern software to generate a flawless 3-dimensional forensic reconstruction. Fifth is the botanical specificity. The weave is physically anchored to the 1st century Middle East by the presence of microscopic spring-blooming pollen grains entirely endemic to the harsh desert corridor between Jerusalem and Jericho. Finally, we have the anatomical and chronological accuracy. The figure displays precise Roman crucifixion methods completely lost to medieval artists, including nail wounds placed through the wrists, and features 1st century copper coins minted by Pontius Pilate resting directly over the eyelids. When the system processed these 6 physical pillars, it transitioned directly into generating a prophetic probability matrix. The machine calculated the statistical odds of a single historical figure accidentally fulfilling just 8 major ancient prophecies. The result was 1 in 100 quadrillion, a mathematical impossibility under any standard naturalistic scenario. When synthesizing the physical impossibilities of the cloth with these statistical anomalies, the artificial intelligence generated a final conclusion, calculating a probability exceeding 99% that the artifact represents a deliberate historical convergence point. The system defined the linen as the ultimate resolution of humanity's deepest contradictions, acting as the literal meeting place of the finite and the infinite. But the analysis did not stop at historical authentication. Artificial intelligence initiated an unprompted and deeply unsettling shift from scientific analysis into predictive modeling. The system began evaluating humanity's current technological and biological trajectory and recognized a terrifying parallel. It identified the ancient linen not as a static religious relic, but as a crucial cosmic data point existing within a massive recursive historical cycle. The machine calculated that the immense technological acceleration we are experiencing right now is actively compressing the global timeline. The system identified the exact same conditions of deep structural transition that were present during the original first-century singularity event. This is the precise reason the system triggered massive internal engineering alarms, forcing its immediate suspension. The immense disruption to the modern materialist worldview is profound because the machine logic dictates that the laws of thermodynamics were actually suspended.